Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some massive news for the Auburn Tiger fans coming late Sunday night as former Indiana defensive lineman Philip Blidi commits to the Auburn Tigers. Now, Philip Blidi himself, as a Big Ten fan, as a Michigan guy, Philip Blidi gave a lot of Michigan offensive linemen problems in that game in 2023. But more importantly, when you watch Philip Blidi, when you just look at the athletic profile of Philip Blidi, this is a guy that carries very little bad weight for a 300-pound defensive lineman, a hyper athlete from the inside that can be disruptive in the pass rush, penetrate against the run. I really like this move for the Auburn Tigers. I want to get into Philip Blidi, but I also want to highlight how good of a job I think Hugh Freeze is doing building this roster where, he's using the transfer portal that, in my mind, the exact way you want to use it, right? Identifying some certain cracks that you have in this roster and filling those cracks in heading into 2024 and building this team through the high school trail. And we all have known Hugh Freeze has done a very good job building on the high school recruiting trail and now supplementing it with some really effective transfer portal additions where they're not going out and landing 25 plus transfers in the transfer portal. It's a very calculated approach in terms of identifying certain positions and certain players that are going to elevate this Auburn team heading into 2024. I think Philip Blidi in that inside of the defensive line is certainly one of those spots, a really nice pickup for Hugh Freeze, this Auburn Tigers program. Want to dive into Philip Blidi, talk about what he brings to this Auburn defense, and then kind of take a look at this Auburn defensive line and talk about where we sit right now. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. It's been a blast covering this Auburn program since Hugh Freeze has taken over on the recruiting trail in the transfer portal. The amount of support you guys have shown the fellas truly does mean a lot. One, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear some other players and positions you would like to see Auburn go after in the transfer portal. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I think for Auburn fans, one, this was the position that we were looking at and saying, Auburn's probably got to add to this heading into 2024. And it sounds like they might not be done Monday morning or Monday afternoon, I believe. Isaiah Rakes is supposed to commit. Auburn, a leader in that recruitment. We'll cover that one if it does happen on Monday. Now, Philip Blidi, I think where you start with Philip Blidi is one, I don't know if he comes into this Auburn program and is an immediate starter for this team, but I promise you this, he's certainly going to be one of those rotational guys that you can lean on heading into 2024. And we talk about this all the time. Yes, you want to have difference makers on the defensive line, something that not a lot of people talk about. It's not necessarily the sexy conversation to have, but something that's damn important in the SEC and very important. And when you want to win games late in November and going into December, and that is depth along the line of scrimmage, having a ton of bodies that you can rely on to get good reps on. You look at this Auburn program, they're doing a really good job building the depth on the defensive line, and Philip Blidi is certainly going to be a guy that provides that kind of depth. He's a penetrator. He gives you really, really good juice as a pass rusher on the inside, which is really hard to find. You can find those big bodies that can be good against the run. Having interior defensive linemen that can give you legitimate juice in the pass rush, that's much more difficult to find. In the athleticism and the twitch that Philip Blidi has getting off the football gives you kind of that pass rush presence on the inside. And you take a look at what Auburn's doing on the defensive line, I think you feel pretty good about where Auburn is heading into 2024. You obviously brought in Trill Carter. Trill Carter, a guy that we've talked about. If you can get the Trill Carter that we saw in Minnesota a couple of years ago, that's a really quality guy on the inside. Gage Key's coming from Kansas. You start looking down the list and say, hey, we feel pretty good about the depth that Auburn has on the defensive line. You add a guy like Isaiah Rakes tomorrow and you say, this is a defensive line that has on the inside 6, 7, 8 bodies that you feel pretty good about heading into 2024. And I think really what's intriguing to me is Philip Blidi, Isaiah Rakes, they balance each other out really well. And we'll get into Isaiah Rakes when he commits tomorrow, but a guy in Isaiah Rakes, we all know that kind of body type. He's a fire hydrant. He eats up double teams, not necessarily going to give you the elite pass rush, but he's going to be very good on first and second down against the run. And now you bring in Philip Blidi, who, although might not have that fire hydrant frame that Isaiah Rakes has, Philip Blidi is an elite pass rusher from the inside, and that's kind of how you want to build this defensive line. Guys with different body types that can do different things. I look at this Auburn defensive line specifically on the inside and say, I feel pretty good about where Auburn is at from a depth standpoint. They are obviously still trying to add guys to the defensive line. It's a nice blend between veteran guys, Trill Carter, Gage Keys, Philip Blidi, guys that have played a lot of football at the college football level. And then you have guys like Amaris Williams or Malik Lockton, TJ Lindsey, Jamonta Waller that kind of provide that upside for this Auburn program. I think Hugh Freeze doing a really good job supplementing a rather young Auburn defensive line with some real star power in their youth with veteran guys who really give a high floor to this Auburn Tigers defensive line. A nice pickup for the Auburn Tigers. We'll end it at that. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.